A warm greeting to everyone. Today is Saturday, August 1st, 2026. This is meteorologist Rubén García. August has now begun, and historically it is the second most active month of the Atlantic hurricane season. In addition, we are approaching what is considered the peak of the season, which extends from August 15th through October 15th. During that period, we have historically seen the greatest number of tropical storms and hurricanes forming in the Atlantic. So, we are approaching the most active period, and it is important that everyone review their emergency plans in case a tropical cyclone threatens the region where we live. So, in today's video, I would like to talk about several topics. First, we will discuss the climatology, or history, of Atlantic hurricanes to examine which areas we should pay attention to over the coming weeks. I will also talk about how the peak of the season may be affected by the El Niño phenomenon, which continues to strengthen in the Pacific. At least for now, and just as we had anticipated, the Atlantic remains quite quiet. We have only seen the formation of 2 tropical storms in the Gulf, and both remained weak tropical storms. Remember that all experts agree that this year's Atlantic hurricane season should be one of the least active in recent decades. Looking at the visible satellite image, we can see that the Atlantic in general is showing signs of a very stable atmosphere. We also have a significant amount of Saharan dust moving westward from Africa. In general, these are the conditions that will dominate throughout the season. However, keep in mind that tropical storms and hurricanes will eventually form in the Atlantic. Now let's look at the next image, which shows the historical frequency of tropical storms during the month of August. The orange and red colors indicate that the area east of the Lesser Antilles and the region east of the United States are typically where tropical cyclone activity is concentrated during August. However, remember that this is based on a 100-year climatology, and for example, the El Niño phenomenon may be modifying the probability of development, particularly in the tropical Atlantic. In this image, notice in green how tropical cyclone activity behaves in the Atlantic. Beginning around August 15th, we typically see a significant increase in tropical storm formation. The peak of the season occurs during the middle and latter part of September. Starting in October, tropical cyclone activity begins to decrease rapidly as we approach the month of November. But also notice in the image, shown in red, how the peak of the season changes during years with a strong El Niño. In general, we observe the following changes. First, the peak of the season takes a little longer to begin, and it is not until the 3rd week of August that we typically begin to see the formation of more tropical cyclones. In addition, notice that the peak of the season begins to decline a little more quickly compared to what is considered normal. I wanted to emphasize the following message. Even though we have El Niño, the formation of some tropical storms and hurricanes is still expected. Most likely, the majority of them will form from late August through the middle of October. Now, before discussing which areas we will be monitoring in the Atlantic over the coming weeks, I wanted to provide an update on the current state of El Niño conditions in the Pacific. We continue to experience a strong El Niño, which continues to intensify, and in the Niño 3.4 region, temperatures remain above the historical average for this time of year. Eventually, there is the possibility that we could see the strongest El Niño on record. In this graph, you can see that temperatures in the Niño 3.4 region have continued to warm steadily since at least early May, and since mid-July they have exceeded 2 degrees Celsius, which we consider a super El Niño. Notice in this image that the average temperature in the Niño 3.4 region is near 29.5 degrees Celsius, the warmest value ever recorded for this time of year. Temperatures are forecast to continue increasing in the region, potentially surpassing the strongest El Niño event ever observed on record. In fact, something surprising is that yesterday the global climate model CFS was projecting the evolution of El Niño, and at least between the months of September and February, it projects that El Niño will remain at record levels for at least 6 consecutive months. It is possible that the peak of El Niño will occur between November and December. Next year, during the spring, we will begin to see a significant weakening of El Niño, potentially toward ENSO-neutral conditions or even La Niña by the 2027 hurricane season. So, it is possible that next season will be more active than normal in the Atlantic. However, of course, it is impossible to know with certainty this far in advance. So, let's review the conditions that El Niño creates and why it results in less tropical cyclone activity in the Atlantic. First, notice how the atmosphere responds to El Niño conditions. Here, the green areas represent regions where instability and tropical cyclone formation are favored, which at the moment remain almost stationary over the central and eastern Pacific. That is why we have seen the development of powerful hurricanes during the past several days. Meanwhile, notice the yellow and reddish areas, which represent regions where stable atmospheric conditions are favored, that is, greater atmospheric stability and lower precipitation. In general, these conditions are not favorable for seeing much tropical cyclone activity in the Atlantic. In fact, when we look at the water vapor satellite image, shown in red, you can see the areas where the atmosphere is very dry. In particular, notice the region between the Caribbean and Africa and across the Caribbean Sea, where conditions are characterized by strong atmospheric stability and low moisture. These ingredients do not favor tropical cyclone formation in the Atlantic. According to the models, at least through the middle or latter part of September, unstable conditions are very likely to continue over the Pacific thanks to El Niño, while the Atlantic, in general, should remain drier than normal. Although these will be the prevailing conditions, we can occasionally see Kelvin waves moving from the Pacific across portions of the Atlantic and the African continent, which can open brief windows of opportunity for tropical cyclone development, particularly in the tropical Atlantic. And as you will see over the next few minutes, we will be monitoring two areas for the possibility of low-pressure development around the middle of August. Another factor associated with El Niño is the wind shear, which has remained above normal across the Caribbean Sea. In the latest update, it remained at the highest average level on record. The models project, represented by the red shading in this image, that wind shear will remain very strong over the coming weeks, extending from the Caribbean Sea into the tropical Atlantic. This means that tropical waves emerging from Africa will encounter difficult conditions for developing into tropical cyclones or strengthening. And if any of them do become a tropical depression or tropical storm, they will eventually encounter problems once they approach the Caribbean Sea. But notice that across the northern Gulf of Mexico and the southeastern United States, wind shear is expected to remain within the normal range. This opens the possibility that we could see the development of some low-pressure systems with potential for tropical cyclone development, particularly in the region north of the Bahamas and east of the United States. I also wanted to provide an update on sea surface temperature anomalies in the Atlantic. In general, notice that the region continues to experience above normal temperatures. However, the warmest temperature anomalies are concentrated in the subtropical Atlantic, and this may enhance atmospheric stability across the tropical Atlantic, creating additional obstacles for tropical cyclone formation. At the moment, notice that the central subtropical Atlantic continues to maintain record temperatures for this time of year, so this could help support the formation of some systems in the subtropical region. But once again, it would make tropical cyclone formation more difficult between the Caribbean and Africa. Also notice that the western Caribbean Sea and central Mexico continue to experience record temperatures for this time of year, so we will be monitoring that region as well. However, wind shear will keep any system moving into the area weak. Then, as we discussed in the last video, tropical cyclone activity during years with a strong El Niño has typically been concentrated near Bermuda and just east of the Antilles. However, tropical cyclone activity has been reduced in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea during strong El Niño years. In general, this is the distribution of tropical cyclones that we expect to see this year. So, finally, let's talk about which areas we should monitor over the next 2 to 3 weeks, especially since strong tropical waves are emerging from Africa, such as the one currently located over the Cape Verde Islands. But notice that, although the tropical wave has good vorticity, it lacks thunderstorms and areas of heavy rainfall because of dry conditions, Saharan dust, and a very stable atmosphere. As a result, it is not expected to achieve tropical cyclone organization as it moves westward. However, the models project that beginning next week, strong tropical waves will continue to emerge from Africa, and we will be monitoring them in case any of them finds a window of opportunity for tropical cyclone development. In addition, some models occasionally develop a low-pressure system north of the Bahamas, so that is the other area we will be monitoring over the coming weeks. At least in this morning's model runs, the ensemble members from the different models are not showing much tropical cyclone development. For example, one version of Google's artificial intelligence model has a few members developing a low-pressure system east of the United States, but nothing significant. In other words, the probabilities remain low at the moment. In addition, it keeps the tropical Atlantic fairly quiet through the middle of August. Meanwhile, another version of the Google model develops a low-pressure system between the Caribbean and Africa around the middle of August. Fortunately, and thanks to the conditions we have discussed over the past several minutes, it keeps the system very weak. Meanwhile, in the case of the European ensemble model, some members, around 20 to 25% of them, develop a low-pressure system just east of the United States, while keeping the tropical Atlantic relatively inactive. However, its artificial intelligence version does show a few low-pressure systems associated with strong tropical waves emerging from Africa. But just like the other models, it keeps those low-pressure systems quite weak and with very little chance of strengthening because of the unfavorable conditions that currently prevail and are expected to continue prevailing across the Atlantic. Once again, remember that we should remain alert in case any tropical wave is able to achieve some development. At the moment, there is no tropical cyclone threat in the Atlantic, and here at Hurricane Info I will continue monitoring conditions throughout the remainder of the season, especially during the peak of tropical cyclone activity. which typically occurs between August 15th and October 15th. So, if you would like to stay informed throughout the hurricane season, I invite you to like this video. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so you will be notified whenever I upload a new video. I hope everyone has an excellent weekend. I will update you on the latest model projections during the week. See you next time.